Hi guys, I'm Ivy. I like to travel and talk about how local businesses make money. So today I'm going to be talking about my visit to a cacao farm, the cacao business industry, and what it's like to make chocolate. Because who doesn't want to just spend all day making and eating chocolate, right? The farm that I visited was called 21 Degrees Estate, and it was called this because chocolate can only be grown 20 degrees north or south of the equator. And Hawaii, Oahu, this farm in particular, was 21 degrees north of the equator. And so it's really like the North Pole of growing chocolate. So in case you were like me and had absolutely no idea that cacao came from beans off of trees, this is the lowdown of how chocolate is made. They come from cacao trees, which grow in pods, which is then cut open, and the seeds are fermented and then dried so that the juices fall off. These beans are then opened and the nibs are taken out. This is used to make chocolate through grinding. The cacao farm just sells the beans after fermentation. Anything beyond that, like breaking it down into nibs, are actually done by the chocolate maker, which is the person that buys these beans. So if you want to learn more about the chocolate making process, I'll link a video and the channel of Manoa Chocolates, which is actually the chocolate maker that 21 Degree Estate works with. They make their own videos on chocolate making, how to become a chocolate maker, and they're definitely way more expert than I am. Speaking about chocolate making, cacao is cacao nibs as well as cacao butter, which is all part of that bean. And most chocolate makers are able to differentiate their chocolate by creating craft chocolate that's 70% cacao approximately, but then the other 30% are other ingredients. For example, we also bought these two different types of chocolates. One is more pure, so this is like regular craft chocolate that's more original, and the ingredients is only cacao, organic cane sugar, and cocoa butter. So everything comes from the actual bean and then added sugar, which makes up the butter, and the sugar make up for the other 30%. But then there's also flavored cacao, which is still craft. And this one includes cacao, organic sugar, cocoa butter, milk powder, Hawaiian grown ghost pepper, and contains milk. And I will not be eating this because I had a really bad experience with ghost pepper shots when I was at Burning Man a few years ago. At 21 Degrees Estate, we also got to do taste tests all the way from 65 degree cacao to over 90% cacao, and all of them tasted very different, not just because of the level of cacao with the different ingredients, also the time that their beans were harvested. So different times of year where the cacao is grown, the natural taste of it will be related to what other kinds of vegetation and produce, etc., that it's grown next to. And so in Hawaii, it definitely tastes a lot more fruity than the cacao that might come from other areas where it's not as like tropical. In Hawaii, cacao beans are harvested 10 months of the year. Every tree is also different. Some are brownish colored, some are green, some are yellow, some are smooth, some are rough. So those are just varieties of DNA. There's also varieties of cacao trees and different levels, I think, of quality in terms of taste. But what I found most interesting, which is like, Ivy, let's get to the business part of it already. I just can't help but go to different places and think about, like, if I were to lead this life, or like, what would it look like if I were to actually go out and own a cacao farm or something? And so I dug a lot, or asked a lot of questions around who Michael and Maria, who are the owners of the farm, were. And they are military veterans. After retiring from the military, they decided to stay in Hawaii and try to be self-sustaining off of the land. They knew nothing about cacao or chocolates when they started. They claimed that all that interested in them was that, you know, who doesn't like chocolate? They wanted to do something that they felt like they liked. They've been running for 7 years now, so they are really like a baby cacao farm. And this is what I think anyone can expect if they were to go and start a small business. The first year was just used to clear the land that used to be rainforest. They planted in the second year, and a tree from seed to actual bean that they can harvest will take 2 years. So really, they've only had about 4 years of harvest. They planted 650 trees in 3 orchards. First production year of 2017, they managed to harvest 2,500 pods, yielding about 1,200 chocolate bars. It takes 2 pods to make 1 chocolate bar. Now in year 7, they do about 8,000 pods, making, I would say, maybe 4,000, 3,000 something chocolate bars from those pods. Now let's do the math here. So understanding that at least takes one person, probably 2 full-time jobs, Michael and Maria, how much are they actually making off of this farm? So as I said, they are making approximately, optimistically, if no pods die, 4,000 chocolate bars. Craft chocolate average price, and average price is what we purchased, costs $15 per bar. That means on a revenue level, they're making $60,000 a year off of chocolate, as the whole farm owning like 10 acres of land, raising a family of 4 in Oahu, Hawaii. And I was like, okay, let me think about this. They're a baby farm. Let me do some Googling and find out how much money could they possibly be making at the peak of production. And so I did a Google search, and every tree can make about 20 to 30 pods. And we'll be optimistic here and think 30, although I think their trees will not make that much because they specifically trim the top so that you don't need a ladder to go up and take the cacao beans. So it's not called trim. It's called, I don't know what it's called. That's 30 pods times 650 trees, which is equal to 19,500 pods. And let's say 18,000, just to be safe, because some will probably die and their trees are not tall enough. That's 9,000 bars, which times 15 is $135,000. Now, each year there are more pods because the trees grow, and then the midge, which are some kind of insect, pollinates the cacao flowers so that more beans are able to grow. There are also a lot of costs associated with running the farm, creating a water management system, buying shade, harvesting, logistics costs of selling it, potentially your beans, to chocolatiers. They actually spend most of their beans making their own chocolate. But what that means is that they have to pay a certain amount to actually use Manoa's chocolate factory and machinery to create their own bars. The land in Hawaii is really expensive. You forget that they bought 10 acres of land just 7 years ago. And I looked on Zillow where the land is, and it definitely looks like a couple $1 million to buy that much land. And this is actually where it got interesting for me, because I was on a tour, right? So I calculated how much they must make from tours. They do tours twice a week. According to online, the tour was packed when I went, and this is like COVID season. And it's $45 per person, up to 20 to 25 people. And so just by doing 2 tours with, let's say, 20 people, they're making about $1,800 to $2,000 per week off tours. And if they keep doing that, let's say 45 weeks of the year, because Hawaii is nice year-round and there's tourists year-round, then actually they did say that a lot of their tours, weekday tours and weekend tours, were a lot of locals who are curious about this art and craft chocolate as well. That makes them another $81,000 per year. Not only this, they also host goat yoga because they have these adorable miniature goats on their property, and they are so cute. And if I lie down, they just kind of climb back on my back. That costs on the website. They run this once or twice a month. It's like $70 per person, and it looks like it fills up as well because they get a tour, a chocolate tasting, and then a yoga session. They also host brunch and dinners. So there's a whole lot of revenue models with this farm, and you can actually see it as that the cacao farm itself is actually a form of marketing for all the other services that come along. As I dug more into the craft chocolate industry, I realized that education is actually a huge part of the industry. This is because people in the industry, craft chocolate makers as well as cacao farms, really believe that consumer education strengthens the entire industry, as well as industries that are parallel who also evangelize for quality of product, for direct trade, and other sustainable business practices. So transparent sourcing, as well as knowing the exact origin of the cacao pods, as well as beans, the trees, and that the beans don't mix, is super important to chocolate makers, and so they actually build really direct relationships with the farms. At 21 Degree Estate, they told us that they only sell to chocolate makers that have come on tours that they actually get to know on a personal level, because there's actually a lot of trust on both sides to ensure that the product quality as well as the practices used throughout the entire supply chain is something that both parties would agree on. This means farmers need to have sustainable business practices as well as ethical business practices. They really value fair trade, no child labor, owning the stewardship of the land. Many of these makers go to the farm to ensure that the beans are high quality by going to taste the cacao themselves anywhere in the world. Third-party middlemen are really looked down upon because it really influences this direct trade. However, co-ops are still around. They are local co-ops that have participants who are all farms within the area, and this co-op can serve to negotiate on behalf of the farm, because some of these farmers in different places may not even speak English, and it is time consuming to build all these outward relationships, and that's where a co-op can come in. But the trust and the relationship is built with the co-op to ensure that the farms participating in the co-op are also sustainable and ethical. This kind of practice isn't required with the big cocoa industries, such as Mondelez, Hershey, etc., those giant chocolate companies. This is also because like their chocolate is mostly sugar and like 10% cacao, and they really buy for price over quantity. They will go to whoever's the cheapest, and most of their cacao comes from West Africa. West Africa produces 60% of the world's cacao, but are also there's always scandals in West Africa around child labor and whether there is a fair wage for the farmers, as well as the quality of the cacao. They really grow for volume. They try to use a lot of different not sustainable practices to ensure the largest harvest. So what's the future of craft chocolate and the entire industry? Well, it's definitely growing. In 2007, there were only 6 to 12 chocolate makers in the world, and a few years later there were a couple of dozen, and as of 2018 there are at least 200 chocolate makers in the craft chocolate space. So why am I bullish on this industry? Well, we can actually draw a lot of comparisons between the cacao industry and the coffee industry. We see the first wave of coffee happen in the 1800s, earlier 1900s, and that was the rise of like instant coffee, more mainstream, and that led to a lot of innovations around packaging, around coffee makers, and ways to really make coffee cheaper so that more people can consume it. In the late 90s, there was this demand for better tasting coffee, and that's actually when a lot of coffee chains started, like Starbucks started in 1971, making more specialized coffees like lattes, cappuccinos, and frappuccinos. And this actually transitioned coffee to be more of an experience rather than a beverage. It became like this space where you can hang out with friends and truly just, it wasn't about the drink itself. There were coffee dates, let's grab a coffee. It became sort of mainstream. And recent years, what became more popular are these micro roasters. So even Starbucks coffee is pre-brewed. There are now specialty coffee shops that roast your beans on the spot, so they're really, really fresh. And these coffees are traceable to their point of origin. You know where these beans come from. They usually have stories around which farmer actually worked to harvest your beans. In Asia, especially in Korea, there's a huge coffee shop culture where when you go to a coffee shop, all the coffee are sourced from one location, so it feels like you're tasting a place and experiencing a place. And these coffees can go upwards to like tiny cup for like $50, $100. Why can't that happen for craft chocolate as well? We already see different inclusion bars to make chocolate taste still good for those that really like industrial chocolate, the big chocolate, but want to still help farmers to ensure that farmers are paid fairly and the reward goes back to the people who are working hard to make this chocolate happen for you. These inclusion bars, like the 70% cacao, the other 30% can be interesting tastes that still satisfy the mass market. We'll also see collaborations with artists and creators as they start their own more ethical chocolate brands. just as we see them start their own coffee brands like Emma Chamberlain. We'll see bigger companies and perhaps chains shift towards more sustainable practices. And we'll even see just like how coffee contains caffeine and it's more normalized to drink several cups a day. You don't see that for eating chocolate. And it was primarily just a health issue because chocolate from the industrial chocolate is primarily sugar. So it's not healthy for you. But cacao is like a fruit. It is healthy. There are parts of it that really generate serotonin. There are inclusion chocolates now that put CBD inside chocolate so that it's good for sleep. And I think that there will be a shift towards more types of chocolates that are more for daily consumption and use. And it's true that some people don't care about where their chocolate comes from and might not care about sustainable practices, whether because they just don't care or they can't afford to care. But with all of those people, there's also a separate market who definitely do care. And it can be that they see it as a luxury thing where they get to sip on fine wine. It's like eating single origin craft chocolate. And this is really common in fine foods where there is a luxury product and there's a more common, cheaper product. And there's dual economies that don't really interfere with each other. The opportunities for you and I can be to help these craft chocolate makers because they are mostly artisans and not business focused people to better tell the stories of where this chocolate comes from, better market this to the mass public, better help them educate their audience, help them move into e-commerce as that becomes more prominent as well. And more people are trying to figure out how to sell their products online or share their stories online. I hope you guys learned a lot because I certainly did, researching a bit more into the chocolate industry and also touring this farm, and hope that inspires you to visit a cacao farm as well. If you're ever in Oahu, 21 Degrees Estate, Michael and Maria are absolutely amazing hosts and very kind at answering all of the questions. So hope you guys visit and see you guys next week.